Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatly Tone's Beatles channel. Lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining me for this video and I hope you're all doing well. So tonight I'm doing something a little bit different. I had a request from one of our subscribers, Ethel the Frog. I love that name so much. Ethel the Frog. And he, not she, he asked whether I would do a video on the Paul is dead conspiracy theory or hoax or whatever you want to call it. So I thought that would be quite a fun thing to do. I've got lots of ideas for videos, but if you do have any specific requests of stuff that you want me to do, stuff you want me to talk about, or things you want me to review, stick them down in the comments, and we'll have a look at it, and maybe we'll do a video on it. So the Paul is dead hoax or conspiracy theory or whatever you want to call it is one of the most bizarre yet utterly brilliant stories in pop history, in my opinion. I first came across it about a year into my Beatles journey, which started sort of in the mid-70s. So probably around 1977 I first came across it and I just loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I didn't believe it, but I thought it was fantastic, and it does make a great story. So we're gonna look at the theory, and we're gonna look at all the clues and try and debunk them. So for a couple of months at the back end of 1969, Beatles fans all over the world started poring over record sleeves, interrogating lyrics, using this finger to wind their records backwards to find hidden messages and clues. The story was written about in national newspapers. It was on radio shows, news bulletins, and in college campuses, you know, all over the world. Of course, like sensible fans like me and you, like we would never have subscribed to that sort of silliness, but it did really explode. But talking of subscribing, nice little tenuous link there. If you like what I'm doing here, why not subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, hit the notification bell, you won't miss a thing. If you were a first generation Beatles fan and were around when this story broke, what did you feel about it? Did you look for all these clues? Please tell me down in the comments, and even if you weren't a first generation fan, just tell me about your experiences when you first heard about all the clues and what you think about it. That'd be fantastic. So if you don't know how this story started, I'm going to tell you. So on the 12th of October 1969, a DJ called Russ Gibb, who worked for a radio station called WKNR, was called by one of his listeners who told him that Paul McCartney was dead and he could prove it. And how he followed that up was he told Russ Gibb to take Revolution 9 from the White Album and play the intro backwards, you know, the bit where the voice goes number 9, number 9, number 9. Play it backwards and he would hear the words, "Turn me on, dead man, turn me on, dead man." So Russ Gibb did that, and this prompted a discussion for about the next hour where various other callers were calling in with other reasons why Paul might be dead or might not be dead. Now, listening to the show that day was a Michigan University student called Fred LeBour. Now, Fred had been asked by his local newspaper to do a review of the Abbey Road album. So he took the Abbey Road album and he pored over the sleeve looking for clues and listened to the record backwards, forwards, etc., etc. And instead of writing a track-by-track review as you normally would, he instead wrote down all these clues that he found that we're going to discuss in a minute. And papers from all over America picked up on this article when it was published, and then it got to the UK and all over the world. Derek Taylor, the Beatles press officer, was bombarded by phone calls from Beatles fans who were absolutely horrified by this. He was getting about 3,000 phone calls a day with these worried fans who wanted answers whether Paul was dead or not. And to add fuel to the fire, this was the time where Paul was hidden away on his farm in Scotland and out of the public eye, and he had been for a while. And you know, he's just withdrawing from the Beatles and just spending time with Linda and the kids. Okay, so let's get into the meat and drink of the story. So how it goes is that during a recording session on the 9th of November 1966, and I remember that date because it's going to keep cropping up, Paul had a furious argument with Ringo at a recording session, and Paul stormed out of the recording studio at Abbey Road, got in his car, drove off, smashed into a lamppost and died instantly in the crash. The UK security service MI5 insisted that Paul's death should be kept a secret and he should be replaced by a lookalike, because the news of Paul's death would cause so much distress and civil unrest and mass suicide amongst the young that the news could never get out, because MI5 are always deeply concerned about pop music and young people. Now, there's three problems with this part of the story straight away. Number one, when Beatles fans were looking for car crashes that happened in London around that time, they came up with a picture of this car as being Paul's car that he died in. And the problem being here is that Paul didn't own a Lotus Elan in 1966. He did have an Aston Martin, but he usually drove around London in his Mini Cooper at that time. Number two, as he only lived round the corner, he didn't usually take his car to the recording studio. He always walked. And number three, as we can see from this diary from November 1966, which I got from the Beatles Bible website, there was no recording session at all on November the 9th, 1966. In fact, there was no Beatles activity to record at all. And more so, Paul was on holiday in France, as we can see from the entries on the 6th and the 12th of November. But wait, before we discount that completely, what is this? This is the Beatles Monthly Fan Club magazine from February 1967. I've got a full set of these, by the way, but that's a story for another video. On page 29, I don't know if you can see that, there's an article that says false rumour, and I shall read it to you. It says stories about the Beatles are always flying around Fleet Street. The 7th of January was very icy with dangerous conditions on the M1 motorway linking London with the Midlands, and towards the end of the day a rumour swept London that Paul McCartney had been killed in a car crash on the M1. But of course there's absolutely no truth in it at all, and the Beatles press officer found out when he telephoned Paul St John's Wood home and was answered by Paul himself, who had been at home all day with his black Mini Cooper safely locked up in the garage. So there you go. So back to the story. So the Beatles decided to hold a top secret lookalike competition, and the winner was a Scottish Canadian, depending on which story you read, called William Shears Campbell, or Billy Shears. After some minor plastic surgery and the Beatles teaching young Billy how to play, sing, write, wobble his head exactly like Paul, he was ready to go. Now, fortunately for the Beatles and for Billy, this was the time where they were locked away in the studio creating Sgt. Pepper, so they weren't doing lots of public appearances, and no one had seen them for a bit. And when they came back, you know, they all had their moustaches, and John had his granny glasses, so they kind of changed their image, which helped, you know, initiate the introduction of this new Paul, or Fool, as he was called, as in fake Paul. You know, one of those really annoying words where you join two words together to make one word, like chillax. Horrible stuff. Anyway, so Fool or Paul or Billy is now in the Beatles. So the story goes that the Beatles felt so bad about deceiving their fans about Paul's death that they started to leave clues on their albums, in the music and on the record sleeves. So we're now going to start going through all the clues that were pointed out as being instrumental in proof that Paul was in fact dead. So I'm going to do, although Abbey Road was really the start of it, I'm going to do these in chronological order because that's the kind of guy I am. So we're going to start with Sgt. Pepper, which would have been the first album with the new Paul or Billy. So we've got the sleeve here. Now, there's lots of clues on here. So first of all, we've got the 4 Beatles here, and the other 3 are all sort of angled towards Paul as if they're pallbearers. And the whole thing is set up like a funeral with a grave. And we see above Paul's head, there's an open palm, which we were told was the sign of death in Indian mysticism. It's not. It's not. There's no record, there's no evidence of an open palm being a sign of death. I mean, why would you need a sign? When you've got a word, death, you don't need a sign. Anyway, another clue was that Paul was holding a black clarinet, black signalling death. Now, here, down here, we've got a guitar in yellow flowers that, if you look closely, do they spell out the word Paul? P-A-U-L with a question mark at the end. And there's 3 bits of, I don't know, bits of something like looking like strings going across. There's 4 strings on a bass guitar. 1 is missing, showing that Paul is the missing string. Now, over here, we've got the doll, and if you look really closely, there's a driving glove there, which is red. It's got red patches on it, covered in blood. And over here, it's almost too small to see, so I'll show you a close-up in a minute. There's a little toy car indicating that it was a car crash that killed him. So if you thought that was freaky, that is nothing compared with the next clue that I'm going to show you. Some genius came up with the idea of holding a mirror underneath the drum where it says Lonely Hearts across the bass drum. And if you do that, you get this. You get the number 1, the word 1, 1 and 1, meaning 11, meaning the 11th month, meaning November. Then you get the Roman numeral 9, meaning the 9th day of November, the day that he died, the 9th of November, 1966. And then you get the word he die, with an arrow pointing straight up at Paul. How freaky is that? So then we come to the back of the Sgt. Pepper cover. Now on the back of the Sgt. Pepper, we notice 3 of the Beatles facing the camera and 1 with his back to the camera, the 1 being Paul, meaning that he's hiding his face because it's not the same as it used to be. I mean, that doesn't really explain why on the centrefold there's a full frontal of Paul in all his glory, does it? But what else on the back cover? You see here, George is pointing, and the lyric that he's pointing to is the bit in She's Leaving Home that says Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock. And then if we go to the calendar again, we find that the 9th of November 1966 was a bloody Wednesday. So that's what he's saying. He's pointing. That's when it happened. At 5 o'clock on the Wednesday, the 9th of November. That's when Paul died. Now, one more clue from the Sgt. Pepper sleeve is this badge on Paul's sleeve. Here, that says OPD, which fans interpreted as meaning officially pronounced dead. But what it actually is OPP, and it stands for Ontario Provincial Police. So that's all your Sergeant Pepper clues from the sleeve. Musically, we had a couple of things. Obviously, in the life, we had the line, he blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed, obviously referring to the car crash that killed Paul. And at the end of the title track, we get introduced to the one and only Billy Shears. Now, the problem that we've got with that is obviously the next voice that you hear is Ringo singing with a little help from my friends, and if it had been Paul, well, all hell would have broken loose. So moving on to Magical Mystery Tour. Magical Mystery Tour is a whole Pandora's box of clues. So the first one, the conspiracy theorists said that the black walrus on the front was Paul, alluding to the line in Glass Onion, here's another clue for you all, the walrus was Paul. Black being a symbol of death. But when we look at the book that comes with Magical Mystery Tour, we see in this picture here where the bass player, obviously Paul or Billy, in a white costume. So he's not the walrus at all. And the walrus in black is John. Now, there's also further evidence that Eskimos believe that the walrus is a symbol of death in itself, although there's no evidence to substantiate that. It's just not true at all. Eskimos do not consider the walrus to be a creature of death. However, if you were to approach one and poke it with a harpoon, it would probably get quite cross and attack and indeed kill you, and that would make it a symbol of death. So sticking with the sleeve of Magical Mystery Tour for a little bit longer, you're probably wondering why I'm holding it upside down, but it's not without good reason, because this is a good one. This is a really good one. So where it says Beatles here in stars along the bottom, which is really the top, but along the bottom when it's upside down, they said that if you join up the stars with a pen, it will reveal a phone number, 537-1038. And if you dial it any Wednesday morning at 5 a.m, you will get a cryptic message from Billy Shears himself. So I was a little bit sceptical about it, but I thought I'd give it a go. So I rang the number. This isn't a phone, by the way, it's the remote control from my amp, but you get the picture. Anyway, so I rang it and got through to an answer phone. It said press 1 to speak to customer services, press 2 to speak to accounts, press 3 to get a cryptic message from Billy Shears. So I pressed 3. I said, you're number 425 in the queue, but your call is really important to us. Please wait to be answered. Anyway, so I waited about 10 minutes, but then it was gone past 5 o'clock, so I just hung up. Now, in the Magical Mystery Tour booklet, there's all sorts of clues. So in this picture here, we have the open palm by Paul's head. Again, that's the open palm that isn't actually a sign of death at all. Then we've got this picture here where he sits at a desk where there's a sign that says, I was. Then we've got on the centerfold, we've got Paul with no shoes on, the sign of a corpse that isn't actually the sign of a corpse at all, because people are usually buried with shoes on. But if we look closer, we can see that his shoes there have got like a red bit on them, which obviously is symbolising the blood from the car crash, and it's on page 13. Look, page 13. And finally, the biggest clue of them all from the Your Mother Should Know scene from the film Magical Mystery Tour. You see that the other 3 Beatles are wearing a red carnation, but Paul is wearing a sinister black death carnation. When questioned about this later, Paul said, well, we just ran out of of red carnations, but if you watch that scene in the film, you'll see Paul dancing about in that scene with a big bunch of red carnations. Now, musically in Magical Mystery Tour, we have two clues. Firstly, in I Am the Walrus, and I can't play this because of copyright issues with YouTube, but if you listen, go and listen to it. I Am the Walrus, right at the end, as it starts to fade out, we hear the BBC broadcast of the death scene of Shakespeare's King Lear. And if you listen to it, there's two little sequences. The first, you'll hear the words, "Is he dead?" And then a bit later on, you'll hear the words, "Sit you down, father, rest you." And then, of course, on Strawberry Fields Forever, we hear John again at the end saying, "I buried Paul." I mean, when questioned about it, John said he was saying cranberry sauce, but as if he would say anything as random as cranberry sauce. Obviously, he's saying, "I buried Paul," because he did bury Paul in his part-time job as a gravedigger. And if that isn't proof enough, here's the picture of John looking very much like Eric Idle out of Monty Python, actually burying Paul in spaghetti. So the starkness of the White Album sleeve sadly put paid to any clues being found on the sleeve. So fans turned to the poster that you got inside the album. And here we can see the only known picture of Billy Shears pre-plastic surgery. No, not that one. This one. This is Billy Shears pre-plastic surgery. And then this picture here of Paul in the bath is said to be his body being bathed prior to the autopsy. And it is true that people that worked in morgues did bathe the corpses before the autopsy, but I don't think they ever used bubble bath when they did it. Musically, we have the gibberish at the end of I'm So Tired. When it's played backwards, we hear Paul is dead man, miss him, miss him, miss him. So let's have a listen to that. What he's actually saying there, if you play it forward, is "Monsieur, Monsieur, how about another one?" And then, of course, the thing that's kicked the whole thing off in the first place is the number 9, number 9, number 9 on Revolution 9, where we hear "Turn me on, dead man, turn me on, dead man." So let's go and have a listen.
Turn me on, dead man. 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 Turn me on, dead man.
Now, the Yellow Submarine album had no clues whatsoever, but the film had this. What do you think about this? This is a still from the film where you can quite clearly see there are two Pauls. One of them is an imposter. So we've arrived at the famous Abbey Road sleeve, the so-called funeral procession going across the zebra crossing, where you've got John looking a bit Jesus-y in his white suit and looking a bit like a minister. You've got Ringo dressed as the Undertaker, and you've got George dressed as the gravedigger. You've got Paul barefoot, a sign of death that isn't a sign of death, and out of step with the other three Beatles, but most tellingly holding a cigarette in his right hand. Now, as a left-hander, he would normally be smoking with his left hand, proving that this Paul is an imposter. And the famous Volkswagen Beetle parked there with the number plate 28 if, signifying, so they said, that Paul would be 28 if he had lived. Now, this totally disregards two things. Firstly, born in June 1942, it means that when Abbey Road came out in September 1969, Paul would have actually been 27 if he lived. Also disregarding the fact that in the UK in the 60s and 70s, number plates or registration plates, the last 4 digits or 4 characters were 3 numbers and a letter. So what the number actually is 281F, not 28. if we turn Abbey Road round the other way, you see this this series of dots here. Well, they said, can you see them? Bit of glare there. This series of dots here, if you join these up with a pen like we did on the Magical Mystery Tour, it reveals 3 Beatles. Sinister, huh? And that's your Abbey Road sleeve. So did the American albums hold any clues to Paul's death? Well, yes, they did. Yesterday and Today, originally issued with the butcher sleeve, was absolutely smothered in death. Loads of dead animal meat and dead dolls as well. Decapitated dolls. What a terrible idea for a sleeve that was. Anyway, when it was replaced with the much more tame looking photo here, it was said that if you turned it on its side, you then see that Paul is not in a trunk, he's actually in a coffin. I mean, a very small coffin, a coffin that probably couldn't accommodate the full, I don't know, how tall was he? 5'10", 5'11", couldn't accommodate his full length body, so they would have to chop his legs off to get him in it, but a coffin nevertheless. I mean, obviously, this completely disregards the fact that when Yesterday and Today came out, it was prior to the 9th of November 1966, so it doesn't really fit in with his death, and he was very much alive at that time. So you'll be glad to know that I'm all clued out now. That's the end of all the clues. But what did Paul himself think about the Paul is Dead hoax? Well, he totally disregarded it and said something like, well, if I had been dead, I'd probably be the first to know about it, and I can confirm that I am very much alive. Paul, of course, rather cleverly parodied the whole Paul is Dead thing in 1993 when he put out a live album called Paul is Live, where he also parodied the Abbey Road sleeve by placing a white Volkswagen Beetle with the number plate 51 is, because that's exactly how old he was in 1993. John Lennon, he loved it and alluded to it in his song How Do You Sleep, in the lines, those freaks was right when they said you were dead. But never mind about what they thought about it. What did you guys think about it? Please tell me down in the comments, especially if you were around at the time, and did you go for it or did you totally disregard it? But I'd like to know what everyone else thinks. What is your favourite of all the clues? Let me know in the comments down below. Ethel the Frog, this one was for you, but I hope everyone else has enjoyed it, and I've had a lot of fun making this video, but it has taken a long time. So please, if you've liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Support the channel by subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. It's been absolutely lovely having you with me for this video, and thanks very much for watching. The next video, I'm going to be showing some of my Paul McCartney 12-inch singles from the 80s, and I hope you'll join me for that. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much.